Good evening, everybody, and welcome to SCA Coaches Corner on our new night, on Wednesday night. Thanks, everybody, for coming back and being our solid listeners and participants. It's going to be great to have you on the show and hopefully provide some comments and questions. This is going to be a hot episode. It's going to be a good discussion. So joining us tonight, we had Sir Sivrid, who's being our engineer behind the scenes. So thank you, Sivrid. And for our coaches, we have Jarl Ailgheanan and Duke Sean and Duke Eliyahu from the Mid-Realm. So welcome, everybody. This episode is going to be, I think, almost a part two to the elephant in the room, policing our own topic that we did, I think it was, about a year and a half ago. And we kind of touched on what we're going to touch on tonight, which is the chivalry, what power the chivalry has, or members of the chivalry have, when it comes to dealing with poor behavior. There was an incident at this most recent Caid Crown that sparked up some frustrated people. And among those frustrated people, somebody posted up about, hey, what can the Knights do? Why don't you guys do something? Now, within our discussion tonight, our intention is not to grow Caid over the coals, or the Caid chivalry, or the Caid marshalate, or the Caid royalty. This really isn't about Caid, because this is a problem that has gone back decades, if not to the very first event that the SCA had. What exactly do you do when you have somebody, in this case on the field, who is kind of making a spectacle, and a poor spectacle of themselves, and basically presenting a pretty ugly fight? And that can be in terms of calibration or just behavior in general. What exactly can be done about it? And that we're going to touch on a couple of different aspects that influence this, and it's not as simple as one would think. And I get that, and there's some great stuff we're going to come into, even some of the virtues of knighthood that are going to come into play. So I think a good place to start with this would be just kind of a basic description of, I guess, what happened with Caid. And I haven't seen any video. I've only heard the accounts of it, but apparently there was a fight in one of the advanced rounds, perhaps the finals, I don't know. But there was some pretty heavy duty lack of blow calibration calling, or that caught the attention of the populace. I guess it was egregious enough that many people noticed it. And were confused and displeased.
Hey, Tristan, can I just throw in one clarification?
Yeah, please do.
It was the fall crown.
Was it fall?
Year,
okay.
Not the most recent crown.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that.
And holdovers from the previous crowns before that.
Yeah, okay. It was there was a series of crowns where there was some stuff going on, and it was the finals of the fall crown that were particularly egregious. Okay. And this last one, they had put some of their new mechanisms in place to kind of prevent that from happening, and things went a lot better than this last one.
Okay, good.
I think there's, in addition to the idea of what knights can do, or the marshalate, or the kingdom can do about behavior on the field, there's also bad behavior off the field, and what do we do in that case? And that's also an issue. So it's not just limited to behavior on the field, but it's more a larger issue than that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good distinction, because at least, and that brings in a kind of our first topic, and that is for behavior that is on the field specifically, that falls under the purview of the marshals. And I guess we can look at this in its at the most granular level of, you have a fight that's going on. The very first line of defense obviously are going to be the two fighters themselves. But what happens if that starts to break down? Really, it's the marshals that are the next kind of barrier of I guess, protection for the honor of the combatants. And in different kingdoms, and we're going to cover this as well with some of the other things too, that different kingdoms have very different approaches for what they feel martial activity is. Some are merely there to just make sure that nobody runs over the list ropes, and that's about it. That they will treat the fighters as though you two are the ones that are going to hammer this out, and they will not utter a word. Other kingdoms have much more active marshals who will step in and pause things when they see the temperature start to really rise and things start to go off the rails, and offer a gentle reminder to help the two combatants get things back on track. And I've even heard some debate, and rather heated debate, over which one of those is better.
I think part of it.
Would like to say anything about that?
Yeah, part of the issue with that, and I've talked to a lot of people about this in the kingdoms I've lived and places I've visited, is how you frame the issue of marshaling, how you conceptualize it, affects how people respond to it, accept the idea of it. If you say active marshaling, people perceive that as potentially intrusive or determinative.
Mm-hmm.
But what you were describing was actually what I call informative marshaling, where you're saying you're letting the fighters know what actually has transpired, because we've all been fighting and not really understood in the middle of action whether we've been hit, how we've been hit, what happens. And we inform each other as fighters, but the marshals are, particularly in a crown tournament, should be expert witnesses and able to say it struck clean, it was flat, you were moving, it appeared good, but you have to judge the force. There's a lot of techniques for ways to doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but it only falls to the marshalate as the second line of defense of people's honors after the fighters themselves. If the marshalate is structured that way, if people understand that, and if the chivalry supports that kind of marshaling. So one of the things that knights can do is, if there's a warranted, authorized field marshal who is marshaling a fight, who's not a knight, the knights can treat them with the respect of their office and say, yes, thank you for providing that information. I understand it was good. I yield the fight. Something like that. Instead of using their position to intimidate an unbelted marshal, because I've seen people try to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things the knights can do is support an informative marshalate process where the marshals are that line of defense of people's honor.
There's a comment I wanted to share and open this discussion a little bit, and this is accurate. It says the Marshal's Handbook specifically states that the marshals are not to be referees. And while it does, being a referee, I guess, also needs a definition, where a referee could, I guess, within this concept, and I could find that this would be objectionable, a marshal would step in and say, you got struck, you're dead, you're done. Like that is what I would view a referee would be. And I agree that would not be a good idea, to have marshals that are calling shots for the opponents. But I like, Eli, your description of the informative part, where you can say, and pause and have a reminder of, it looked very clean, you just got hit without any obstruction, what looked to be pretty good, just to let you know, maybe you missed it, maybe, but it's up to you to ultimately decide. And I think that's the distinction between viewing marshals as being referees versus assistants to help the two combatants try to sort it out and present an honorable fight for everybody who's there, because everybody will walk away with their opinion of what they just saw. And
Exactly.
It's that is kind of I think the social pressure that the two fighters have of, and we've all seen the person that says, I don't care what anybody thinks, I'm going to do what I want to do. They won't respond to that pressure. And I guess that kind of bridges us into the influence that knights have. If somebody is sensitive to that kind of pressure, where you say, you know what, it didn't look too good, and somebody would come away with that and say, well, okay, I need to change my behavior, I need to do this better. But then you get the real problem child who's like, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want to do. And that brings our dilemma to the knights themselves, the chivalry. And from what we were just talking about, the marshalate standpoint, just for some background, I was knighted in 1996, and at the time, knights they had automatic martial powers. Like you could authorize fighters, you could sign people's authorization cards. You didn't need to go through a warrant process, but that changed, at least in the mid realm where I was in. Subsequent to that, where being knighted, you did not get automatic martial warrant or powers, or however it wound up shaking down. And I know kingdoms handle their marshals differently. How they get warrants is more kingdom specific. But I don't know if there are any kingdoms currently that have automatic martial authority granted when you're elevated to the chivalry. Do any of you know if that's the case in other kingdoms?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think there's this kind of an expectation that, so for us in Artemisia, we have authorized marshals, which is anybody who is authorized to be on the field and to basically run the safety of an engagement. And then there are warranted marshals who are basically officers under the marshalate. Most of those are going to be branch marshals. Some of them are going to be marshals at large, which are not tied specifically to a branch, but have the authority to do authorizations and to be marshal in charge of a field and that sort of thing. So we just have a distinction between an authorized marshal, which can be pretty much anybody. You don't even have to be a fighter to be an authorized marshal, but a warranted marshal, that's more of an officer position, whether it's a branch or a marshal at large. And I don't know how other kingdoms deal with that. That's kind of the distinction that we have. And pretty much if you are a member of the chivalry, you're expected that you can safely, marshal a list field.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you, Jeff, for that comment. He also just commented that he's a Meridian warranted marshal and grants authorization warrants to the Shiv with proof of valid membership. Again, I think this is kingdom specific. Some kingdoms I think are pretty strict with, you have to go through the full warranting procedure, including some kind of test. I don't know. They're all different, but and that I guess kind of bridges us to all right. So that's a fight that's going on the field right there, active, live. I think the expectation of the knights generally is, okay, this just happened. Now what are you going to do to fix it? You're dealing with the aftermath now. You did not get an opportunity to help contribute to resolving the issue when it was going on. And the fight's over. Like, the crowd has perceived something. Maybe each fighter has their own perception of what happened, but there's discord. There's disharmony with what had happened. And now I think this is where a lot of times, I know I've been talked to by people that I know. It's like, hey, Tristan, what just happened? Like, that looked horrible. Who's going to step in to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I think that was kind of the overall feel of the post that got put up, asking, okay, this has happened many, many times. And we're always told, knights, chivalry will deal with it. We'll take care of it, and then it keeps happening, or that's the dilemma. I think that's going to be the.
Yeah, Tristan, I'd like to throw a couple of thoughts in here on that.
Yeah.
So the question that came up that really prompted this whole episode is, what are you as a chivalry going to do? What are you doing? How are you using your unlimited powers to fix this? And so I want to just kind of mention that, again, this is a problem that is as old as time. It is as old as the sport. And, it is partially a product of a self-calibrating honor system, right? Where the person who gets struck gets to determine whether or not they're defeated. As a friend of mine had once said, this is the only sport where you don't win anything. You are always granted victory by your opponent. It's your opponent that says that they are bested. And it is partially a product of that. I think by and large, I mean, historically speaking, we get it right most of the times. But when we don't, it goes bad, and it looks bad, because you have this position of perceived power in the crown that is, appears to have been, for lack of a better word, stolen. And that has an effect on your reign later. But besides that, as far as what we can do, there's always this question of, why didn't you do something? You were there, you were watching, it looked bad. Everybody said, saw it look bad. Why didn't you do anything? And there's, I mean, part of the reason that sometimes when we stand around and don't do anything, it is not because we approve of the behavior. A lot of times it is because we are dumbstruck. We are caught off guard by somebody who otherwise has conducted themselves, fairly and chivalrously in lists before. And sometimes when this happens, we're literally just kind of standing there, like, we're asking the same question, like, what just happened? I've got the experience to understand, what's going on in a fight, but, sometimes it happens to us. And, and it's one thing when you're like, if you're constantly on the lookout for somebody to be cheating, that also has the potential to have you interfere where, maybe there wasn't cheating going on, but you're so intent on making sure that you're catching the cheaters, that, it's really hard to, if you're looking for it, you're going to find it, sort of thing. But also, if we are expecting that people are going to call their shots justly and fairly, and then they don't, and it's happening right in front of us, yeah, sometimes the reason we don't say something is because we get caught off guard. I have, as a crown and as a knight and as a marshal, I have stopped a fight in crown and mentioned to the marshals and mentioned to the crown that, I saw a blow that was clean and unimpeded, that was not accounted for in any way. I'm not going to tell somebody how to call their blows, but I'm going to tell you that you got hit clean and you didn't say anything about it. Likewise, I have stood by, and, I have not done that when I should have, and that's the thing about, the question of, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do something? And what are you going to do? Sometimes we get it wrong. And sometimes
there's risk putting yourself out there, Sean. I mean, there really is. Probably the most hurt that I've been in the SCA recently was putting myself out there and counseling another knight in a crown list, that, hey, I think it looks like you may have missed some stuff. And the way I did it so poorly that even if I was trying to, the point that I was trying to make, and again, I think I'm coming from a good place. I'm trying to protect the honor of all the combatants out there. And if I mention something to you, it's not because I'm questioning your honor. I'm hoping to get you to look at it and think about it again. And so that we can all come to, this shared notion of what, calibration and how we're supposed to be playing. It's super important that we're all playing the same game, because one of the most basic fundamental things of our game is it's baked and built right in. You can cheat if you want to. So we've got to do something, we've got to try to help us all play the same game. And if someone starts to play on that line a little bit, and the thing is, the reasons they could do that are so beyond, I'm just trying to cheat. They could be, the armor's not feeling funny. Adrenaline can be just coursing right through you. I mean, we all miss shots. And it's not about making sure that every shot gets called. It's about if there's some trends, or if it looks like there's an issue or a problem, it's, you try to help people come back into the middle ground where everyone else is and play the same game. but you have to be able to risk putting yourself out there to do that. So, in this most recent thing where I was trying to counsel someone, it came, and I did it so poorly, the message got missed. All they heard was, Ailgheanan thinks I'm cheating, and that hurt them. They got upset, and when it got back to me, I got upset because it's like, that's not what I was trying to say. But you've got to still be willing to put yourself out there. And I took it as an opportunity to try to make sure I'm communicating what I think is important better, and to, make sure that the person understands that I'm trying to come with empathy, that I'm trying to help them, and I'm not accusing them. I'm just trying to help them. We've all been there. So, let's help each other through these situations where, we could potentially make mistakes and it could look ugly. And then, the people who are watching us as examples think, well, that's how you're supposed to do it. You can just let your adrenaline carry the day if you need to. And it's like, well, no, I think we all agree that we shouldn't allow our adrenaline to carry the day. Our adrenaline should not be a part of our calibration process. If our armor's not fitting appropriately, or if we change the padding in the helmet or whatever, those are all excuses for how something can be missed. But then your friends and honorable fighters and knights and marshals say, hey, hold, what's going on? Let's try to fix it, and let's try to get back to all playing the same game. But there's risk putting yourself out there. And so I've done it. I felt pretty good about it. I've done it, and I felt terrible about it. Mm-hmm. And you still have to just say, I'm going to keep doing it because that's what I think is the responsibility of the chivalry. It's not necessarily a power. It is a responsibility. If I can just carry on with this theme here real quickly, I can. Oh yeah. Why don't we talk about that? And then in a second, I'll throw up what the actual corpora, powers of a knight are. And then
what you're saying is that our voice and our willingness to use our voice to speak with honesty, veritas, the virtue, which also takes courage, and doing so to promote justice, those things, that is our power, our influence. We don't have power, we have influence. And our influence at a certain level and our willingness to use our influence for good becomes our power to act, to promote the good. It's why I say it's not, as some people say, deeds, not words. It's deeds and words together. How you act, what you do, the renown you gain becomes your influence, and your influence becomes your voice and your ability to use that for good. And that is the power that knights have in that situation. And I think, therefore, we have a responsibility also to use that, our voice, to use our renown effectively for the good, and also to teach the virtues. Not just we talk about teaching the sport, and we all love it and we do it, but we also need to teach the virtues, because this is not a sport. What we do is not a sport in isolation. It's part of a society. And we wouldn't be having these discussions if it was only about the sport itself. And although that's the focus of most of these get-togethers, these conversations, several of them are about the society around the sport, and that's where we can exercise our power.
I think too, to address, because I've been in a situation almost exactly like Ailgheanan, and having watched a crown tournament, and from the stands, I wasn't a marshal on the field, but got to watch a very ugly fight, but felt like I needed to do something afterward to hopefully try to help my brother knight maintain his honor, or at least try to recover it, because I heard gasping in the crowd the whole 9 yards. And usually after these crown tournaments, we'd traditionally get the knights together and have a little shiv meeting after it was over, and there was just a weight in the room Like everybody felt it, and nobody was stepping up to actually say what everybody felt needed to be said, but no one had the words for it. And I was the one who jumped on the grenade and merely said, you know, brother, boy, that really looked ugly. And people noticed. And this was somebody that we were always on friendly terms. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's a good man. And it was 3 years before he would utter a word to me. Like, absolutely hated me for having the nerve to even bring up the idea that his fight was anything except honorable. So, and granted, in terms of the person who wrote the letter, and I'm sure most of the populace, they would never have seen that. They never would have seen what my relationship with him, it basically was destroyed in that moment that I even mentioned that, people responded rather poorly to that. Now, granted, I looked at it from his perspective. Tournament's over. Your armor's off in a bag. And now somebody says your fight was ugly. What do you do about it? Even if somebody does bring that to light to you after the fact, what do you do? Now, granted, I felt it was my duty as a knight to at least bring it up to him, because without him knowing, maybe he didn't even notice at all. Somebody needed to say something. At least that's what I felt in my heart. But I took a big old scar for that. It cost me a relationship. And I, like Ailgheanan said, I hurt him, and I didn't want to. That wasn't my intention. It was to make him aware of what nobody else made him aware of. And, I would have hoped that it wouldn't have gone to where it did, but it did. But nobody saw that part. That was a private among the chivalry situation. And, that was,
that's ideally those things are handled on the field. And once people leave the field, it's over and it's settled. But there are times when it doesn't. And
that's just not true, Yahoo. It's not over.
It's very rarely happens.
Perception, people say, well, there's only two people involved in a fight, and that's a lie.
Oh, yeah.
That is a lie. It's you, your opponent, and every single person who's watching it, and they get to have an opinion about you for the rest of their lives.
Especially at Crown.
Especially at Crown. But, I think the fact that sometimes, because we put so much focus on Crown, we actually miss the best way to go about this, which is we do this at every tournament, and then it's no surprise at Crown if, hey, we're going to hold you to a really good standard. Well, we should hold you to that standard in every tournament, and then it's not new when we get to Crown List Day. But because there's some people who may only watch one or two tournaments a year, there is a lot of focus on Crown List, and you're right. Especially at Crown, it can look like, it's like, what's going on here? So, but I mean, I know what you're saying, Eliyahu, and I think there's an essence of the sport. There's a romantic, take the sport out of it. There's a, our activity, which is a community, which is a, it's bigger than just the rules of the list, which is the things that make it a sport. It's bigger than that. And I love the idea that we're going to leave it on the field and then we're going to walk off the field and we're not going to have any, if we can't fix it on the field, then, it gets fixed on the field or it doesn't need to be fixed kind of a thing. And it's like, it just turns out I don't think that's true. I don't think it works out that way. I've seen too many things not get fixed on the field and then become a problem for a long time.
Which, if it does get fixed on the field, if it does get agreed on the field that the outcome was just, then it can stay on the field. If it doesn't get handled that way, then it becomes an issue outside the field. But if the people watching, all the people watching, see that there was a just outcome, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. So people must see that the outcome that happens is what is correct and what should happen, then and fair, then it stays there. But if it looks like something happened and it didn't get resolved, it does go beyond the field.
We had a couple of crowns recently that I think bring up kind of a good example of some of what you're talking about. A crown that we hosted October a couple of years ago, we had semifinal fight where the two combatants, to me, they clearly, worked out like they were fine with how the fight was going, and whatever shots were called or not called. But the problem was the populace at large has no idea what we're doing. They don't understand what it's like to what a bad shot feels like or a missed shot feels like. They don't understand that. And what they see is a stick making contact. And by the rules of our game, you get hit, you fall down. Like that's what it's supposed to be. And when that doesn't happen, you have the populace at large standing around going, "What the hell just happened?" And this, again, to Ailgheanan's point, and again, I think it is. I agree that yes, if we were to address this at lower level tournaments, it would be less of a problem. But I think the reason that it is a problem with Crown is because, again, with this perception of power, right? This is the list where we get to determine that the highest point of honor for our hierarchy, right? For our social structure that we have. And that's why everybody's watching. That's why everything is on display. So you have these two guys that are fighting, and things get missed. They are fine with it, but the populace has no idea what's going on. So we, as chivalry, and this is a point we made in that moment, was it is not enough for you to be okay with how the fight is going. You have to let the populace at large know and understand. I mean, we have an obligation to educate the populace on the fly. As to what is going on in the fight, right?
So here's an example, Sean,
that
I see. Because this is what happens a lot. Yeah. One guy misses something, and maybe it's completely an honest mistake. They miss it, but the other person, and this is in Crownless. Duke Gareth had a comment earlier. I think he said, in my opinion, the most extreme cases of this topic occur when someone wants to win too much. And he's correct. That's probably when this stuff happens too much. It really is. Your want to win gets messed in your calibration. That's a terrible thing, but this is probably what's happening the most in these situations. But something happens, you think you got a good shot on a person, they don't call it, then you get hit, and your calibration goes up just a touch. It's like, well, you know what? I'm just going to breeze right past that myself. And then, and then it's called hold. And it's like, guys, is everything okay? And since you both have realized you've made a mistake, you both say, no, we're okay with things. And then it goes on and it goes on. And at this point, you go like, are you guys okay with things? But because now they both, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, at this point, they're both cheating. And because they're both cheating, they say, yeah, we're okay with it. One of us is now, they've got it in their heads. We're going to fight and I'm going to hit him and it's going to hurt. And then they're going to call it and I'll get my victory, or, they're going to hurt me and they'll get their victory that way. And that's why it doesn't matter that they're okay with it, because they're putting themselves now at risk to get hurt. They're thinking they've got to swing hard enough to hurt the other person so that they can feel it. We're going beyond the notion of it's okay if they're okay with it, because as a kingdom, as a marshalate, and as an order of the chivalry, and as the crown normally, they're like, no, we're not okay with any of that. So,
to clarify there, I mean, the stuff that I'm talking about is when I throw something and my opponent says that it's no good, and I agree that it's no good, I'm okay
which is legitimate. And that's where a good marshal, who is part of that conversation, here's what they're saying. And then before they say lay on, they say the combatants have discussed it and they both acknowledge that no good blows have been thrown, and this fight's ready to continue. So that way the populace also knows. And You're right, Sean, that's an actual thing that I think we can help by marshaling and then verbalizing to the populace what's going on. But the elephant in the room here is when things go bad and wonky in tournament and people start missing and it starts turning into actual straight up cheating, you got to do something about it. And it doesn't matter if you ask the opponents if they're okay with things, because it no longer matters if they're okay with it.
I totally agree with that.
Informative marshaling is not just informing the fighters what's going on; it's informing the populace who are watching about what just happened. And the process is not. I don't want to be too technical about the marshaling, but it's not just going up and saying, is everything okay? It's being very specific. asking a person who threw the blow, did you think the blow you thought was good? Not let my opponent decide, no, what did you think? Did you think it was good? And if they say no, then there's nothing, then you say it was nothing good, and you announce it to the populace and continue. If they think it was good, you ask the person who received the blow, say, what did you think? Well, and you talk about it. You have a conversation. In fact, the best fights are when the fighters are talking to each other. There's a communication going on.
Well, communicating, not talking at each other, but communicating.
Communicating, yeah.
There's some folks that just like to be chatty as for gamesmanship, but communication is a key.
But informing and communicating, the marshals, the fighters to each other, the marshals to the fighters, the marshals to the populace. If all that happens, the likelihood of it getting to what you're saying, Ailgheanan, is where it just escalates it, because you can see, if you're marshaling, you can see them turning up the dials, and you can see that that's about to happen, and you have to stop it before that.
And somewhere in this process, I mean, ideally, while it's happening, I think ideally, while it's happening is when you should say something and do something, and if not, then these after tournament things, so it needs to come up there. And then if it's not coming up there, the problem, you're going to get into a situation where it becomes tradition that it's okay. I mean, I really wish we had someone from Cailgheanan who had been at all the crowns that had gone wonky, so we could ask, well, how did it escalate to these things? How did it get to the point? Because, I've only seen the finals of these tournaments, and you're like, yeah, that's kind of yucky, but how did we get to here? And you normally get to there earlier in the tournament, or, the things that are happening in that one fight that you can't hear on video. And, and again, I don't want to be too harsh of a judge on video, but everyone, the people who have gone to those lists think it's a problem. So I don't feel quite so bad when I look at it on video and go, that doesn't look so good, but the video's not, I mean, I'd hate for us to get completely locked into where we all get to be referees by video, because that's not entirely right either. But, sometimes if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, well, it's a fucking cheating duck.
Yeah. And that was something that I was going to throw in about this whole discussion too, is it's really easy to Monday morning quarterback all of this stuff. Right. I mean, yes, it is best to catch it in the moment if it's happening and make corrections as we can. But again, as far as why didn't you do anything, or why did you just stand by and let this thing happen? Again, getting back to this, sometimes we're just dumbfounded, and sometimes we just, somebody that had otherwise proven themselves to be, calling their blows correctly, all of a sudden doesn't. And, we're surprised by that. And it's, it can be really easy to, like I said, the Monday morning quarterback this whole discussion. And, and that doesn't absolve us of, dealing with the cheaters by any stretch, but, it's very, very rarely a matter of, that guy cheated, so, kick him out, because unfortunately, once it's done with, and once somebody is named, as crown heirs, that's kind of, I mean,
yeah,
somebody would have to have the wherewithal to having been told that you cheated the list, they would have to have the afterthought, not the forethought, but the afterthought to say, you know what, if my victory is going to be questioned, I don't want to have any part of this, and abdicate.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the various mechanisms that different kingdoms use or have used to try to solve this problem. And I know that there's some pretty wide and varied ones, all the way from, rather gentle and polite to fairly rigorous, shall we say. I think, Eli, you had some comment on this one. We were talking a little before the show. Would you like to come in with some of the things you found?
Can you ask me that again?
We're talking about different solutions that different kingdoms have found and integrate into their culture for how to safeguard or how to respond when something starts to go off the rails like this, or they have
Yeah,
a problem child type person.
I have, and some of this is deals with behavior not only on the field but off the field. And I've asked over the years, I just celebrated the 40th anniversary of my knighting. Over the 40 years, I've asked knights in lots of different kingdoms what they do, again, policing their own. What do you do when someone behaves badly on the field, off the field? What do you do? And the toolbox has been pretty limited. It has ranged. The answers have ranged from essentially nothing to talking to them, but with more what I refer to as applied physical diplomacy, to the heavy, which I don't advocate, but the heaviest action is to petition the crown and the board to remove somebody from the peerage. And that's been done. But so somewhere from nothing to the extreme, there are options in there that usually involve conversation. And it's conversation, honest conversation with a person who's problematic, but not just talking about what they're not doing right or what they've done wrong, but talking about what they need to do to correct their behavior. Because if somebody has a way of behaving, a pattern of behaving, and you tell them to stop it, and they don't have a model or a path for how to institute corrected behavior, they won't be able to do it. They may not know how to do it. So part of what's incumbent on us in having these conversations is education. Part of the education is to help people before they get to be problem children. But the problem children it takes conversation. And if conversation doesn't work, and if they can't correct the path, and they won't change, we have a responsibility to say, we're not going to let you ruin the experience for everybody else. And that's may be extreme, but they not only damage the renown of the whole order, but they damage the experience of the society for other people who aren't in the order.
Absolutely.
If somebody is a bad actor, we have to use our voice. Our renown gives us a voice with more impact, and we have to use that voice to affect change. And sometimes the change is to say, we are going to see that you can't play anymore because you are ruining not only our collective renown as an order, but you are ruining the experience for all the other people who we have promised to defend the society for. And so, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And that takes veritas, honesty. It takes courage. It takes a sense of justice. It takes the virtues are not just nouns, they're verbs. How do you act with them? And you act with them by seeing that they occur, and that takes vigilance. I mean, it does. We have to be alert to these things. And if somebody not in the order complains about someone who is in the order, we have to take it seriously.
Yeah, and I think that all kind of goes back to I kind of want to address the impact, right, of us getting it wrong, which goes to what Ailgheanan was saying before. It's not just the two people that are fighting. It's everybody, right? We have a feudal monarchy system that we are trying to recreate, and our highest position of honor is determined by martial combat, by rattan combat, right? And in order, I mean, ironically, I know, Caid was the kind of subject matter test case for this, but it is Caid's crowns that on the inside of the crowns, it is etched in the crown. It says, "You rule because they believe," right? And if you have 200 people on an event and you have 20 people in crown, 20 fighters and their consorts, 80% of the populace, right, is there to witness and there to watch us execute this mechanism that from the dawn of our society has been chosen to select the highest position of honor in our organization. And when that happens correctly, and you have a beautiful set of finals where the two combatants execute well and defend well and put on that pageantry and put on that display that we get to see so many times, it is a beautiful thing. And when it goes bad, it goes really bad. But the overall impact that is really important, and this is the problem. When we fail to execute that mechanism correctly, the populace at large begins to lose faith in the entire thing, and rightfully so, right? We have to get it right. I mean, we get it right a lot, but those bad apples and those bad instances where the populace at large looks at what we've done and says, "This is the ruler that you've chosen for me. You've chosen for me a cheater. This hobby that I decided to do, you want me to bend a knee to this person who, in my eyes, is a cheater, and there's nothing I can do about it," right? That's the problem. That is the impact that all this has, and that's why we need to have these conversations about how we're gonna fix it, and what we can do ahead of time and what we can do after the fact. And when we are dumbstruck and when we are surprised that this has happened again, we have to have those conversations about what is going to happen the next time. And I've had this conversation.
What's our mechanism? If we have a mechanism, if we know, if we have a plan, then when it happens, we can do something about it. But if we're trying to make it up every single time, and this happens, because we as members of the Order of the Chivalry and the Marshal are oftentimes working under the influence of our crowns, what we do and what we say sometimes is dependent on, what we think the crown would want us to say and do. And I think that's mostly a good thing. I don't think it always is, but I think it's mostly a good thing. And I think it's, so one of the tenets, or one of the things we've been talking about here, is what powers do a knight have? And I think we should just go ahead and get it knocked out. If we can put up the graphic of what corpora says are actually the duties of the chivalry. So it's from corpora 8A 4A. 8 is the personal awards and titles, A is patent of arms, and A is the chivalry. So the duties of the chivalry are as follows: to set an example of courtesy and chivalrous conduct on and off the field of honor, to respect the crown of the kingdom and to support and uphold the laws of the kingdom in corpora, to enrich the kingdom by sharing his or her knowledge and skills. D, to support and uphold the crown of his or her kingdom. E, to enhance the renown and defend the honor of the peer's lady or lord. F, to advise the crown on the advancement of candidates for the chivalry. And G, to bestow the accolade of knighthood upon a candidate for the order of knighthood by sole right as both sovereign and knight, or acting directly for a sovereign who is not a knight. So the last two are very much about, the recommending to or the making of another knight or member of the chivalry. But there's nothing in there that says police your own. It doesn't explicitly say you are always a marshal and you should call a hold and make sure the list is right all the time, or to do what needs to be done, so we don't actually have a lot of straight up explicit, power to do those things, unless you try to take supporting and upholding the laws of the kingdom in Corpora, and if your kingdom has more codified, if your martial is codified in such a way, or your crown has said specifically, I want a clean list, I'm going to ask my marshals and my knights to make sure that everyone's talking and will resolve issues and all that kind of stuff, then you're specifically empowered. And I think that is where, I've taken the responsibility to step up and say, hold, guys, what's going on here? Or, or a backroom conversation, or standing up in the shiv circle to say, hey, we all want to be thought of as chivalrous people who are playing by the same rules as everyone else, and we would all want to know that, right? And everyone goes, yes. And I'm going to go, you, sir, so-and-so, seem to be playing by a different set of rules. It's like, it sucks to do that, but I've done those things, and I'm do it again. But where's the rule, or where's the thing that explicitly gives me the power to do that?
And if I could just jump in real quick, I've personally witnessed the spectrum between a crown that says, all right, here's what I want my marshals to do. I want them to make sure that everybody's honor is protected, be an active reminder, help the fighters, all the way to the other end of the spectrum is, I don't want you uttering a word. If you're a marshal, you let them go the distance and do it how they're going to do it. And that's my will. And as knights, like Ailgheanan said, we are basically servants of the crown. That's our sworn allegiance. So, and anywhere in between as well. So there's that factor at play too, where, and I know that the bout that I mentioned, I was even in the stands. You can't have somebody from the stands come running down onto the list field and go hold and start to jump in where the marshals are standing around there. Like, even that creates a hectic drama type situation. And, the distance that I was watching, maybe I was mistaken of what I saw, but, there's a lot to it. And like you said, with Corpora, there isn't a mandate. There is not specific listed authority or enumerated power for that. Maybe we could talk about the influence part.
But honestly, I think the closest that gets to that is to, set an example, rule number one there, set an example of courteous and honorable behavior on and off the field. And, so it's kind of one of those things where, we do not have power to affect some of these things. And unfortunately, collectively, we all have the responsibility to do that as well. And I mean, there's only so much example setting you can do to influence people who otherwise might just shack a shot here and there to try to get through a list.
And I'd like to add too that one of, I think, the greatest disappointments that I had in being made a knight was my own frustration with not being able to do anything of what I thought was of true effect, other than talk to somebody who's my friend. And in those instances, it goes pretty well. But to somebody who, I try to offer that gentle reminder, I realize I'm powerless really to do anything if they just decide that they're going to do what they want to do. Not to say that I'm keen on forcing my opinions on anybody, because I'm not. But the concept, kind of to soothe my soul was disturbed with it. In order to soothe that, I did have fellow knights that said, you know what? The way that you solve this is be the best knight that you can be, and be an example where you're going to have some bad actors, but just try to show that there's the other side of the coin, and be that example. But, and I got that and did my best, but I never really reconciled the fact that I felt helpless when I saw things go off the rails, and I wanted to respond to those people that were frustrated and try to tell them that I was trying to do something. There was nothing really that I could tell them. And right. I felt that in the note that was posted about, I'm frustrated. Knights always tell us you're going to be doing something and nothing ever happens. And I've been the knight that has been asked, what are you going to do about it? Or can't you do anything about it? Or what are you going to do about it? And not have an answer.
Yeah.
You know, that hurt me as a knight because it felt like I should be able to do something.
I've been in exactly that position as well, and I didn't have an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And to lie to somebody, you know, that didn't feel right either.
Yeah.
So
I definitely have stepped in, and again, I'm willing to do that. I think I'm doing it, and I think my justification and my power comes from I am fealty to my crown, and it is my understanding that I believe the crown would want this discussed, and I'm okay with the crown coming and telling me I didn't want that discussed. So, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to put the crown on the spot. Then, if they want to call me down on it, then they can call me down on it. What I've mostly had happen is a crown tell me, I'd like for you to marshal a lot of this crown list and make sure it's clean, and yeah, I was going to do that anyway, but it's really glad that you told me, because now you're telling me what I was going to do, and I'm cool with that. But I think most crowns want that, so I'm going to always operate that I am a good servant of the crown, and it's my job as a knight to, when need to step in and do what needs doing, and then I'm willing to have my crown call me out and tell me I didn't do it right.
When you do that off the field, you see something off the field, some bad behavior, do you also have the responsibility to step in and say something?
Yeah, I have, and I will, again, if need be. And again, I think it's because while there's not anything explicitly in Kapora that says, hey, you need to go be the police person, for the society, I believe being a good peer means doing what you think is best in the traditions of your kingdom and your crown, and then your kingdom and your crown can tell you if you got it wrong after the fact if need be. And then I'll change what I'll try to do the best I can. But I think that's where I get the power. I am a peer in fealty.
Yeah, and it's very much a team thing, and the idea of the concept of fealty really is a two-way street. Your crown has to back you up when you decide you're going to be the one to throw yourself on the grenade, and not turn on you and blame you for causing a political problem when perhaps they were expecting just everybody stay silent. We'll just kind of let this go and let it get in the past, and everybody will forget about it, which I think that creates as much problem as perhaps a dramatic scene, which might seem bad in the short term, but if people see that other people are unhappy about it, it's a little different than if somebody sees constant, or people in general see constant bad behavior, chronic, that's never being addressed.
There are times when it's best. There's situations arise, off the field situations usually, where it's best for the crown not to notice, not to take official notice. Because if the crown takes official notice of something, they have to take official action. But if they are advised to not notice and let some of us, their peers in fealty, work to address the situation and handle it, then we might be able to find a resolution that the crown doesn't have to take official notice of, because the crown's tools are often a feather and a hammer. And sometimes you need something in between to try to guide someone back to ethical behavior within the standards of the society. And that a hammer would not do that, and a feather isn't enough. So you need sometimes for the crown not to take notice of something and let others of us use our voice, use our influence to try to guide the situation back to a better outcome.
Well, the other side of that is, I think for crown tourney specifically, it is the responsibility of the crown to conduct the list and to make sure that the list was basically that you are naming heirs who you feel have rightly and justly won the tournament. And the crown has, in crown tourney specifically, the crown has the ultimate responsibility to make sure that that's happening. And I think, I don't know that I agree that it's either a feather or a hammer. I think there are, shades in between. I know I've come out in the semifinals of list where I saw somebody get hit square in the face, and I told him, I'm not going to tell you how to call that, but you didn't block any of that, And he said, "Oh, I thought I got a little bit of on my shield," and I said, "No, you didn't. Like, it hit you square in the face. You didn't get any of that," and he took it. And
I would much rather have the marshals do that than the crown, because the appearance that the crown is determining the outcome can occur. I've seen that before. So
it can. There's any number of ways in which you could look at it and say that this crown is picking on somebody else because he wants a particular fighter to win. And that's
I always think it's preferable. It's not always possible, but it's often possible.
I think you're right, Eliyahu, that it's preferable.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I bet Sean calling a hold in Crown List, going out and talking to someone meant that he didn't have to do that again for the rest of the list.
Right.
Because I've never had to really, on any of the times I've been fortunate enough to host a Crown List, I've never had to get into the weeds and tell fighters, "Hey, you guys keep screwing up. I'm not going to tell you you're dead, but I'm going to tell you you're out of the list." I've never had to do that, but I think they always knew that I would if I needed to. And I think that kept people from doing stuff.
Yep.
So, I think it's better and I've, as Crown, what I've tried to make sure that my marshals knew was I had their back.
Yes.
Right.
And this is what I would do if I was marshaling this list. Feel comfortable doing it.
Right.
Feel comfortable doing it. And then if anyone gives you any grief, I got your back.
Yeah.
I think that's better, but it also works. I saw Casca during his during his Crown List here. He screamed. I think he was like he was all the way across 4 fields away, and he screamed, and everyone at that list heard him say, "What the hell did I just see?" But I saw every single fighter check to make sure it wasn't them.
Right.
And it was clean sailing from that point on, because no one wanted to be the person why hold was called on 4 fields.
Right.
Well, I can tell you, I've never done I've never said that thing where "don't make me come off the throne" or "don't make me get involved." Like, I will be involved. Like, if I see something going on and I have that much, if it is that clear to me, I am going to be involved. I'm not, and I have no hesitation about doing that, because again, we have that responsibility. But I always tell people, strike hard, strike clean, and take it when it hits you. And if you don't do that, if the marshals catch it before I do, like in that one instance where guy get hit in the face, I looked at the marshals that were standing there and I was like, "Did you see what I saw?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw what you saw." And they let me handle it. Sure, I could have deferred to them and had them have that conversation. But, like Ailgheanan said, like I got no problem handling that. And there is something to be said for, when the crown comes out and tells you, "Hey, look, you just got punched in the face." You can call that however you want to call that, but you just got punched in the face and you can't tell me you blocked it. That
makes it obvious. Certainly makes the point obvious.
It does.
Well, and I think that's the nice thing about having it be a crown tournament, is you have the crown on hand. But there's some pretty high profile tournaments where either the crown isn't there, or they don't have the same level of investment of, these aren't going to be the tournament winner is not going to be my heir. But high caliber tournament, does the crown feel a hesitation with going down and coming onto the field and saying, "This fight looks pretty ugly. You guys may want to check what you're doing here." Or maybe the crown's not even present. maybe you just have a marshal in charge. And I've seen some marshals that do a pretty good job of actively stepping in when they see that temperature level start to rise, and like you said, you can feel it. But others kind of just, all right, well, if they're still swinging, they must still be happy with it, and let it just go and go. And that, I think, starts to contribute to the problem child thing of, if somebody can get away with it with absurdly high calibration, or finding ways to call rivet or whatever on their helm and not take shots, and then keep doing it and doing it and doing it and never getting corrected, and then one day they wind up at Crown or what have you, and now it's a Crown problem.
I feel like that doesn't really happen at Candlemas very much, though.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, yeah, I'm kidding, of course, but you have some of the you have a high profile like Candlemas in the mid realm, and when you have somebody like Branos and Ronvalder and those caliber fighters in there, those are guys that are not going to be cheated,
right?
And you might slip one off of one of the other unbelts or one of the newer knights, but you get into some of those higher caliber lists that you're talking about. I mean, Outlands Prize Tourney, Burka, Candlemas, some of the some of those other tournaments. There's a lot of those high profile lists out there that, like you said, don't really have the Crown doesn't really they don't really get involved in those. Outlands Prize Tourney at Estrella years ago. I mean, that was held by the Outlands Crown. And so if they saw something, I'm sure they would say something. But
sure,
I think also those are lists that to Alanon's point earlier, maybe we should be paying more attention to those and when those things happen. Because when somebody cheats their way in something like a Candlemas or a Burka, it's their reputation that gets damaged. Whereas in Crown, which is that's why there is so much attention on Crown, is because it is having an impact on the lives of 1,000 people who want to take part in this hobby that we're doing. And we're watching these two guys, and yes, you absolutely get a reputation when you blow off a shot in Crown too, but the impact is so much more because there's so many more. I mean, as it was Sagan that told me, it's like every time you're Crown, you have everybody's good time in the palm of your hands, right? That I've always looked at the real power of the Crown is just having a captive audience that is listening to me when I say, like, this is how we should SCA, right? Like, we should be doing more of this and less of that. And, again, that's just an example, or you can only set an example in that way, right? You can only say, like, we should be entering court this way, or these are the awards that we're going to be giving out and that sort of stuff. But you set an example that way, but otherwise, as soon as you step down, somebody else gets to come in and say how they think we should SCA, right? Mm-hmm. But for 6 months at a time, you get everybody's undivided attention so that they can see, like, how does Sean do this SCA thing? And maybe we should do more of that. And maybe we should do less of this.
And you're making a pitch. If you make a very convincing, earnest pitch while you're on the throne, things will stick.
Yeah.
We are all familiar with reigns where the majesties at the time of those reigns did not make a convincing pitch, and the way they kind of wanted to do things did not become tradition.
Right.
Something I would want to point out here too, because I think it would be easy to listen to our discussion and have people walk away thinking, oh, well, so it's the Crown's responsibility to fix these things. And I will say that in the defense of many Crowns that I've seen, oftentimes they can even be a little intimidated by the chivalry, of thinking this is the body of people that are maintaining the reputation of the fighting of the kingdom and of the atmosphere of the kingdom. And I'm only on the throne for 6 months, or I'm here temporarily. I've got a lot of other things I need to do. So I'm going to kind of leave that to them. And I think that's part of the kind of the handoff back and forth of either thinking the other group is doing it, whether it be the royals themselves or the chivalry. And there's one other thing I wanted to jump to before we move on.
Wait, before you leave that, though, I think you're right. It's circular, Tristan.
It is.
It is very circular. It is the Crown's responsibility. I don't know what exactly
Ultimately,
went
yes,
on
it is.
in Caid, but I'm holding the crown responsible. The crown should have found ways to try to work through that. And the Order of the Chivalry should have let the crown know, we're going to support and back you. And then the crown should let the Order of the Chivalry know, I'm going to support and back you. And we're going to hold all of us, and we're all going to support the marshalate. And we're going to all hold ourselves accountable. Each of us will hold. I mean, I know it's not the same thing as with a separation of powers. Like it's not like it's the Supreme Court and it's the presidency and it's the legislative body. It's not exactly like that, but it is exactly like that also in the sense that you have to support each other. And I think a good, strong act of chivalry supports the marshalate. And a good, strong act of chivalry supports the crown, and lets the crown feels comfortable then making hard, tough calls. And if the crown is letting the Order of the Chivalry know, I'm holding you accountable, and I've got your back. And if you have to make hard, tough calls, you can always look to me, your crown, to support you. You know, in healthy kingdoms during healthy times, that's happening. It may not be explicitly pointed at and said that's what's going on, but that's what's going on. And when things have gone completely pear-shaped and wonky, something's wrong in one of those. It's potentially wrong in all of them.
I want to add,
you've got to find a way to get it going back again.
I want to add something to that we accomplish this level of responsibility by being individually responsible, by saying, this is what I believe, this is what I understand, this is what I saw, this is what I think about it individually. That not assuming that it's like if a project is left to a group, nobody's taking responsibility for it, and everybody in the group has to be individually responsible for the group to act in support of the crown, for the crown to, everybody has an individual responsibility to act with justice and courage and honesty, and to say to say no, or to say yes, but to do so honestly with respect for other people and their differing points of view, but to say to say no. We are individually responsible, not just as a group, but the group is composed of individuals who each must be willing to take a stand. And that's how justice is moved forward.
Well said.
Yeah. So what I wanted to add in there was something that kind of came up during what Sean was just saying, and that is the idea that you have tournaments that have enough real heavy hitters in them that can deal with somebody who wants to come up and, kind of basically blow off shots to win. In a crown tournament, there are kingdoms that basically have spoilers. That's what they come in to do, is to make sure that whoever wins is the one they want to have win. And I've seen kingdoms that will do this even to having who the opponents are lined up before the list. It's not random. It's, all right, we're going to pair you with this person, with the idea of you're not acceptable really to the whoever's holding the cards, the list table, or if it's directed by the crown or whatever, and you're going to get the toughest draws all the way up the tree to make sure that you are out. And that's kind of its own kingdom culture thing, but I think isn't that where the kind of the ducal prerogative thing is? You can withdraw at any time. I've always wondered why that is, because anybody can withdraw from any fight at any time.
That's actually not the origin of the ducal prerogative.
Okay.
And I got the story of the ducal prerogative straight from Duke Henrik, who was one of the first knights and dukes of the society. It was in the early, and I'll make this very quick, in the early days of the society, whoever won crown tournament had to autocrat the next crown tournament. And I think it was, won twice, and he didn't want to have to autocrat the next tournament. So he said, no, it's my ducal prerogative not to have to fight, because everyone who was a knight was expected to fight in crown tournament. And he said, no, I have the prerogative as a duke not to have to fight in Crown Tournament. Somewhere along the way, it got twisted into the ducal spoiler thing. That's not how it started. That was never the intention. I don't actually, personally, I don't agree with someone doing that, fighting just to keep someone out. I also don't, I think matching someone with a fighter who you don't want to win with someone who can beat them, and then that person withdrawing, I think is the Crown not taking the personal responsibility to talk to someone who they find unacceptable and say, we find you unacceptable to fight in our Crown this time, and here's why, and here's what you can work on so that you can become acceptable, to use as a teaching moment. That so, and that's my.
Why are you so good, Eliyahu? You're such a good person. So here in Aidenvelt, they have destructive buys, and they also redraw the list.
Thank you.
Every round in Crown Tournament. So if you find yourself getting that destructive buy several Crown lists in a row, you possibly should do some introspection, because it was not an accident. The Crown is sicking that destructive buy on you on purpose.
Well, and there's a couple other things.
I'm not a fan necessarily of it. I didn't like being. I was a destructive buy once, and then when it did my reign, I'm like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Yeah, I'll just not accept your letter of intent if I don't want you to win Crown list.
But that's taking responsibility as the Crown for the quality of the people on the list. Every kingdom has developed some method of controlling entry into or success in the list, because it's their responsibility to ensure that they pass on the crown to worthy heirs. So I think it's better to keep somebody who is problematic out of crown rather than let them into crown. And then
it's probably better. I think it happened here, Eliyahu, though, based on there's some periods in its history, things got extremely political, and one crowd would hold out the people that he didn't, he didn't want in, or to particularly be competitive against the person they hoped to win. And then another crown would hold out all of their friends. And eventually they were just like, so no one holds anyone out anymore, but they use destructive buys. I mean, I think that's how it probably came about. Sean probably knows how it came about.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
what you guys are talking about is addressing Tom's comment about, there is within Corpora that you can, if you find combatants not acceptable to you, you can just basically tell them, no, you're not going to be fighting in my crown. But like you said, that opens up its own kind of political problem. And, maybe the spoilers were felt to be, or the destructive buys, or however you want to call it, would be, well, maybe this isn't going to be as much of a political hand grenade as just saying, nope, you're out.
Well, it all goes back to what Eleanor was saying, at the beginning of this, like it's hard, I mean, doing the right thing is hard, right? Mm-hmm. And holding somebody out of a list because they have had problems, and to kind of address Tom's point there, one thing about holding somebody out of crown, I have held people out of crown before. And I had a reason, and I gave them the reason. But the reality is, you don't have to have a reason. Right. The crown does not have to have a reason for holding somebody out. And when it, I mean, I always put in a letter, and I suspect one of these days some crown's going to say, maybe we just had too much of you going deep in the list. And when that happens to me, I'm going to say, yes, Your Majesty, would you mind if I fight your buys, or mind if I, marshal your list, right? Mm-hmm. The crown doesn't have to have a reason, but if you have concerns about the stewardship of your kingdom from a combatant or their consort, I think you have an obligation to hold them out. And that doesn't mean that every time you sit the throne, you're going to hold the same people out. Things can change, people can improve. And sometimes, again, as we mentioned earlier, calling out bad behavior is a road to correcting bad behavior. And I've done that. I've held people out, and I've had conversations with them afterwards about their stewardship of the kingdom, and they have made strides to improve that. I also wanted to address something else that Tristan was talking about having heavy hitters in the list or not having heavy hitters in the list. I think it's the not that typically encourages somebody who is kind of, maybe a mid-grade, an up-and-coming, crown contender. One of the things about, like, again, the Candlemas or an Outlands Prize tourney or that sort of, some of those international lists that we have, you're going to have some heavy hitters in those lists, and that's a list you want to be in to kind of compete with those. But in a crown tourney, there's a lot of heavy hitters that cannot run the risk of being in the tournament. And so now all of a sudden you get a guy who maybe they've gone to the quarterfinals, or maybe they've gone to the semis, and all of a sudden you don't have, Sean and Ailgheanan and Branos and Ronvalder in this list. And, at what point are they going to say, now's my chance? All I got to do is shrug a couple of shots, and, this is my one chance, and all of that stuff plays into how we get to this, and how individual fighters, kind of get to that. But yeah, not having heavy hitters in the list is I don't know, almost as problematic as Ailgheanan was saying, that the destructive buy, or like you were saying, Tristan, it's like, if you're going to be in this list, we're going to line up all of our top fighters against you. It's like, what if you don't have top fighters, right? You're letting this person in the list. You don't have anybody that can stop them. And everybody else that is competing with them, on maybe an even footing. Like I said, you blow off one or two shots, and all of a sudden
that's the difference. Yep. Okay. It looks like we got about 10 minutes left. This has been a pretty big topic. Is there anything that any of you would like to discuss that we have not covered yet? Like have you seen any other mechanisms that different kingdoms have used to try to mitigate the problem child fighter?
I will say, since we had kind of mentioned, Caid as kind of the test subject for this, a result of that fall crown was they have completely revamped their marshalate process. One of the things that they're doing now is they're asking each fighter at the end of each fight, are you satisfied with the results? Are you satisfied with how everything went? They are being, I would say, more proactive in addressing calls that are clean and unobstructed without determinate marshaling. And again, it's a very fine line to walk there, but they are at least making some efforts that have been, I don't know what the discussion was, or how they determined that this is the mechanism they were gonna use, but I know that they had I want to say the Gildenhold or the Caid unbelted tourney at the end of January, which is Caid unbelt it's a pretty prestigious tournament for the unbelted community, and it is also one where they have historically had unbelted fighters blowing shit off. And from what I understand, that was one of the first times that this mechanism was implemented, and it went flawlessly. And my understanding was that was also before Crown Tourney as well. So they had an opportunity to kind of try it out, and it worked as they had intended. Where any questions that had come up as to shots that were acknowledged or not acknowledged, that apparently worked as designed. And then Crown Tourney happened, and I don't know the extent to which that was necessary, but from my understanding of this most recent Crown, it went a lot smoother as a
That's
result
great to
of
hear.
them trying something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's the best we can do is problems come up and we try to solve them. Maybe the solution's not perfect, but we try to improve it as we go along.
I think the one other thing I would want to add, if the question or the premise of this conversation is what power do knights have, I think it's the real power. I mentioned our voice and our influence, but it comes from deciding to be a problem solver instead of a problem maker, to not
Right.
be a source of problems, but to be someone who contributes to finding solutions. And I think that decision is empowering in an individual sense, and I think it's important. So,
cool. All right, and I'm really glad that we've had so many people on that have offered some really great comments and whatnot. I think this is an important topic for knights, the populace, the crown, everybody that's involved with the SCA. That you can't help but have this affect you, whether it's seeing a tournament that's going to determine the heirs of your kingdom, or even just watching any high-profile tournament, or even just a regional tourney. There can be stresses when you get some poor behavior, what people perceive as poor behavior, because our reputations are on the line, perceived honor is on the line, and to communicate poorly or present yourself poorly, just what do they say? It takes years to create your reputation and a moment to destroy it. Definitely holds true. Anybody else would like to wrap up with a comment before we go?
I guess my final thoughts is when the populace sees these issues and wants to know what the knights are going to do, not every knight's going to do the right thing, but there are many knights in every kingdom who will do what they can to try to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Feel good about asking them directly. Go to them and ask them directly. Don't just throw it out to the social media. What are the knights going to do? Go have conversations and talk to the Order of the Chivalry. And I'm sorry, I get caught in this a lot too. I say knights, and I mean Order of the Chivalry, because there are a lot of great masters at arms. But sometimes it helps to have someone directly come to you, or contact you and say, this looks like an issue. Are you guys doing anything about it? And that helps empower someone who might not feel empowered, because now they know this is impacting the populace. This is impacting other people. So my request out is ask specific members of the Order of Chivalry to help you. And if you're a member of the Order of the Chivalry and you get asked to help and you're not sure how, then ask someone in the order that you respect. But if you have to, call me. I'll be happy to try to give you what advice or counsel I can, as I know any of the knights on this panel would do. We're here to support each other. Doing the right thing is, what's the old adage that it's not hard to figure out what's right, it's having the courage to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get that courage by having someone specifically let us know, hey, it's hurting us. So that's my ask back out. We do have power, especially if you empower us. So thank you.
That's really well put.
Yeah.
Well put.
One of the things that I often have said to people during vigils, but also our dependents, is that being a peer means that you have the courage to speak honestly and the strength to do so courteously all at the same time. And those four virtues, when exercised all together with the intention of furthering justice, the fifth virtue, is good and can accomplish a lot. And that's the power not just that knights have. That's the power that anyone can have and exercise.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. This has been a great discussion. Again, thank you everybody for listening live and for adjusting to our schedule now on Wednesdays. We have another schedule change. We're actually going to shift to every other week for the live shows for the time being. We're probably going to be putting some shows in on the intermittent Wednesdays, but scheduling being summertime and everything's getting rolling again, people are getting busy. It's getting challenging, so we're going to kind of do those as we can schedule them. So I believe we have next week coming up what to expect for Penzic 50s. Looks like what's on our schedule. So I shouldn't say next week, on the 17th of May, in 2 weeks from tonight. And we're going to be talking about the melee training that's going to go on and the melees for Penzic up and coming. So join us for that show. That should be very exciting. So in the meantime, thanks everybody for attending tonight and commenting, and we'll see you again on Coach's Corner soon. Have a good night.
Thank you.